Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison, and I want to welcome you to day 225 of Humanity Rising. We started, as most of you know, during the depths of the pandemic last spring, and we've been continuing every day to bring people together from around the world as we all collectively traverse the challenges of this pandemic. Things have gotten complicated lately. The vaccines were supposed to deliver us from COVID-19, but what we began to experience in Europe with the AstraZeneca vaccination is all kinds of side effects and even deaths. So country after country began to stop the vaccination, causing confusion. Yesterday, the United States put the Johnson & Johnson vaccine on pause because it's producing blood clots and other side effects. There's more and more reports that people are experiencing all kinds of side effects now with the vaccinations, with a preponderance of women experiencing side effects over men. And then yesterday in Israel and today in the United States, it was reported that this little virus, COVID-19, is now showing that it can punch through the Pfizer vaccine. And so we've got a problem, Houston, with the vaccinations. They're not proving themselves to be as efficacious as the governments had hoped. And I think what is up for humanity is to come to the point of deep recognition that we can't just keep going the way we've been going and assume, oh, you got a pandemic, let big pharma deal with it. But we're basically not going to change anything. We're going to just keep going. That arrogance is what nature is assaulting right now. And in talking with Ed Muller, who I'll introduce more formally in a minute, before this session started, he says that according to the International Commission on Biodiversity, there's between about 650 and 870,000 more viruses that are capable of wreaking havoc on the human race. And scientists are telling us that we've so egregiously mismanaged our relationship with nature that we're running out of time. So I think all of us need to kind of sit back and take in that we are now being challenged not with a quick fix, but with a fundamental transformation of what it means to be human. And if we can't rise to that occasion, then what is in store for us is almost unimaginable. And to give us all just some sense of the arrogance, the willful, malicious arrogance. Take Japan. The Japanese government announced yesterday that they're just going to dump the radioactive water from the Fukushima reactor accident 10 years ago, just back into the Pacific Ocean. It's highly radioactive with all kinds of radionuclides, including plutonium, strontium. We know from 75 years of experience with nuclear weapons and nuclear power that radiation causes cancer, radiation causes birth defects, radiation causes all kinds of deformities. And like we've noted with the vaccine, we had a panel just last week that says there's incontrovertible evidence now that women are more susceptible to the deleterious effects of radiation by 2 to 1 than men. And so are children, particularly children in utero. And the Japanese government is just going to dump the radiation, tons, hundreds, thousands of tons, just into the Pacific Ocean. That's the level of arrogance that the pandemic is demanding that we stop. I know this is a rather dramatic way to start Humanity Rising, but in just the news of the last 24 hours, including in Minneapolis yesterday, another Black man was shot within 10 miles of where George Floyd was killed last May, 20 years old. Stopped because he didn't have an up-to-date license plate, and they shot and killed him. What is going on with humanity at this time? That's a question that all of us need to ask ourselves more fundamentally now, because the pandemic is just not going to go away than we've ever had to ask this question before. We've come to the point where we're either going to regenerate or we're probably going to perish. And that's the theme that we want to delve into today. But before we open up our program with the panel, let's just take a pause. In the midst of all this tumult, in the midst of arrogance almost beyond measure, in the midst of the fragility of what it means to be human now, let us just take a minute and take a few deep breaths and center yourself in your body. That's all we've got is our bodies. Close your eyes and place your attention on your heart. Listen to your heartbeat. In a spirit of deep gratitude and thanksgiving that you're alive at this extraordinary moment in the human journey. 1 minute. Listen to your heart. Thank you, everyone. And now, with an open heart and a heart full of gratitude for each and every one of you who are joining our session today, let us strike the note of regeneration. And it was actually Ed Muller, who has become a dear friend and partner in many things that we're doing through Humanity Rising, which we'll talk about in a moment or so. He's the founder and president of the University of International Cooperation in Costa Rica. He's been part of the UN Commission on Biodiversity for many years. He has taught around the world, and probably more than anyone I know has been a champion. In fact, it was Ed who really stopped my world, last spring by saying, Jim, sustainability is irrelevant. You can't be sustainable with a broken ecology. There's only one option left for humanity, and that's regeneration. And when he said that to me, it kind of blew me away and opened my mind to a whole new possibility. And since then, Humanity Rising has embraced regeneration as the single word, the single concept around which humanity must now organize itself if we're going to ensure that the world beyond the pandemic is free of pandemics, because it's become healthy and abundant and regeneratively aligned with the natural environment. So we're going to concentrate on Regenerate Costa Rica. And Ed, I'm delighted to welcome you back. You may recall that Ed convened a 7-day panel last July on donut economics and regeneration, and then again in October, 5 days on what it takes to develop a regenerating world. And it was through Ed that we developed our master's in regenerative action, a whole new kind of MBA. So Ed, welcome, and I turn the program over to you.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you for your effort. I mean, holding up 200 and some days, it's not easy, and you've done it. I didn't think you'd make it when you actually said you would start this and didn't have an ending date. But it's right. I mean, I founded the university 27 years ago. Now on April 26th, we'll become 27 years old. And I did it to be able to train the leaders for Latin America to implement sustainability. This was 2 years after the Rio 1992 summit. And at that time, we talked about integrating society, economy, and environment. And basically, it was limited in that perception because we said sustainability is the interaction of those three. In 1996, I added culture, politics, and spirituality. And I still believe today that spirituality is probably the most important gap that we have. And I'm not talking about religion. It's a totally different thing. Spirituality is mindfulness, it's responsibility, it's caring. It's the feminine principle of caring, Mother Earth, Father Sky, and we've lost that connection. And this started with the Greeks back at the beginning of our era, when Socrates said we have to be very objective, and then the theory of one hypothesis and looking for one answer. The thing of being discarded, we're separate. Our mind is separate than the facts. And then the physicists like Newton saying that what nature is, what life is an interaction between components. And it's the forces between those two components that define. So we actually got sidetracked in all our science, our academic development in the Western world, that separated humans from nature and thus allowed us to think that we could control nature and that we were the bosses, that we were, that we could do whatever we want. And you look at countries like the US, and my country's following those steps. Look at your coastlines. I mean, they're destroyed. Your rivers are straight. They were modified. Everything is altered. There are very few places on Earth. I've been lucky enough to be able to have worked in some of those, like the extreme south in Cape Horn, where humans have not changed nature. So nature decided to give us a lot of warnings. Back 20, 30 years ago, it started, with extreme events, hurricanes, droughts, And it kept increasing that. Last year, we broke the records of the number of hurricanes. We've seen extreme fires due to drought. Australia, basically, many of the forests which my friends worked with in establishing biological corridors and protected areas just went up in flames in 4 days. California, with 100 million trees dying in 2016. Russia, they lost probably up to now 20 million hectares due to fires. So the thing is, humans still didn't react. And the reason is that most of the time, these impacts have been for the most vulnerable. So Bangladesh is suffering with sea level rise. Other places, they build walls. So I think nature is giving us a last chance. I see this coronavirus as a gift from nature, saying, look, humans, here's my last present. It's a fire drill. It's going to put everybody on the knees. Hollywood actors to refugees in camps in Syria. Red, pink, black. No, it doesn't matter the color. It doesn't matter the religion. All of you are going to be on your knees for enough time for you to reevaluate what you've done to me. At the same time, it actually is giving us hope. It's showing us that it is resilient. The news that came out after 3-4 months of pandemic is nature was coming back all over the place. It was flourishing. So it's like a last message, because we could eventually get a vaccine that's effective. We're probably halfway there. We could eventually get a treatment, but there is no vaccine or turning back from planetary collapse. And we're very close to this. So that is why, since 10, 12 years ago, we started working on the conceptual development of regeneration. But then, being an academic, I actually got tired of seeing all these theories and hypotheses and mental discussions, academic discussions, and very little action on the ground. So that is where I decided to follow Buckminster Fuller's recommendation, not to fight the system, but to actually build a better one that will make the old one obsolete. So that is what Costa Rica is in the process of doing now. It's not the whole country yet, but we want to design a roadmap for regeneration that can be followed by many, many other countries. And this is what Costa Rica, Regenerate Costa Rica is about. I'll ask my two team members, Fernanda and Edgar, to turn on their video. This is only part of our 16 or 17 people team that we have by now. Fernanda is a brilliant young woman, speaks 5 or 6 languages, did her BA in Taiwan, did her master's in Sweden. Edgar has a very long history. He was a mayor of a city that is now ranking on the top lists of cities because it's measuring its development based on pollinators and earthworms. And I wish we had time to bring in more of my team, fabulous people that are really synchronized with regeneration. But before that, I just wanted to give an overview of what Regenerate Costa Rica is about. I looked at many, many different alternatives, actually found that there were a lot of people working on regeneration independently since probably 2006, 2008. And there was very little connection between the groups. So in 2018, what I did was invite 20 of the top regenerative people in the world to come together. And from there, we designed actually a global network for regeneration, the Regenerative Communities Network, sponsored by Capital Institute, with John Fullerton leading the process. Then with Humanity Rising, we managed to bring in a lot more. And with this joint Masters in Regenerative Action program, I think it's not only different because it's the first time we have a master's program in regeneration, in action for regeneration, but it's probably best program in the world because all the top experts will be participating in sharing their experiences with us. So I'm really looking forward to that cooperation. Looking at all these different alternatives, actually got to meet Kate Rayworth in 2017 in a meeting that Hunter Lovins had convened in Colorado. And when she showed the donut, I said, wow, this is a powerful instrument because it allows you to really look at the holistic, complex reality that the world is in and our countries are in. And then Andrew Fanning, he was at Leeds at the moment, did the country donuts. And I looked at Costa Rica's donut, compared it with other donuts, and you can immediately have a photograph of how the country's coping with its ecological impacts and its social development. So we see countries like Norway, Australia, that have a full, highly satisfied society. But at the same time, they have used natural resources, ecological resources, way beyond what politics allocated to them as a country. So yes, they've gotten to the social development using resources from other countries, and especially developing countries. So Africa was plundered by Europe, Latin America was also plundered by Spain and other countries, and it's still being plundered without a true recognition of the value. So I'm not going to go down that track, but this donut, and maybe I'll just illustrate it quickly. I think you're seeing the screen. This is Costa Rica's donut. So we can see we've exceeded our use of fertilizers, we've exceeded CO2 emissions, we've exceeded material, ecological footprint, and land use change. And our main social fallbacks are inequality and employment. This is before COVID. So inequality has increased a lot more than that, and employment has multiplied many times. But then taking this image, it's actually easy to think, oh, okay, what we need to do is get rid of fertilizers. By getting rid of fertilizers, we actually regenerate the land, the soil, and that will allow us to capture huge amounts of CO2, be it through regenerative cattle, regenerative agriculture, and put that soil, take it from the sky and put it beneath our feet. And that will reduce our material footprint and our ecological footprint. And we can also then revert land to functional landscapes where no matter if it's a productive landscape, a city or an urban context or a protected area, every landscape or marine landscape has to allow us to enjoy ecosystem services that keep us alive. So we can actually do a lot of this, reverse our impact at the planetary level and come back to our country boundaries by changing the way we produce food and the way we manage our land and giving nature more land back. So if we optimize food production and if we optimize cattle production and we optimize land use, we can actually give back 30 or 40 or 50%, which is what actually AUCN said we need to give nature half. We can give it back to nature and still produce more food than what we were doing before. And at the social level, it's basically, we've had many governments that have promoted free trade agreements, neoliberal practices, and resources, power were concentrated into a small percentage of the population. That is what generates the inequality. So what we need to do is get these international massive corporations that are bringing cheap food from Vietnam, from China, which our farmers cannot compete. Our country has high social standards, high medical standards. So it has a cost, and we just cannot compete against really cheap food from other places that doesn't even have the quality or the sanitary requirements to be consumed. So we need to develop local economies and bring people to be active in the economy. I'm not talking about jobs, I'm talking about work. I'm talking about them being active in the economy, not just unemployment. So in 2018, we started the initiative. And then when COVID came, basically we found ourselves with an emergency because the areas in Costa Rica that depended basically 100% on tourism were in extreme hunger. Of course, the tourism companies closed, people were kicked out, they didn't have savings, there was no income, and farmers had moved out many, many decades ago because land was too expensive to use to produce food. So we had to challenge to start feeding families. And we started with food banks, but then we said, no, that's not going to help. We need to actually bring agriculture back at the community level. So Fernanda will talk a little bit about that, but that was not enough. We need to work with local governance, with a lot of other issues, because we need to deal with the environment, with the economy. We need to turn our economies into regenerative ones. We need to work with society and make them participants. So it's not going to vote every 4 years and then forgetting about politics till the next election. It's actually getting involved in defining our future and giving youth hope and a chance to build their future. Then culture is fundamental. Culture is what makes us in Costa Rica different from those in Norway, Japan, or China. And culture has been washed away at a faster speed than biodiversity has. So we need to really enhance our cultural heritage, but also develop a strong future culture. So it's not a postcard of traditional dances. I'm talking here about the glue that keeps society together. And that is what gives us pride and recovers our self-esteem and allows us to move forward. So if we want to reduce inequality, we need to increase the pride, the recognition of what we are worth, and that we're not less than those tourists that come and visit us. And then we need to reinvent politics. We need to get young people, especially young women, moving the older white-haired males out of politics. We need to get that feminine principle, that caring principle back into politics, where the common is more important than the individual. And this is not communism. This is regeneration. So youth does not want to get involved in politics anymore, but they have to, because the older generations have already eliminated a lot of the possibilities of them having a future. And then spirituality. So how do we actually enhance our common sense of community, our responsibility, our move to action? This is destroying our communities, this competition, this racism, this, God. I mean, we think that billionaires have the right, just because they have money, that they're better people and they have the right to change planetary conditions, to invent fake food, to decide policies in countries, to bribe presidents, to bribe governments, so that they can do what they want. And they can control us through social networks and know exactly to which restaurant we went, or listen to our cell phones, and direct basically propaganda for consumption. So we need to restructure that part too. So I would like to pass it on now to Fernanda so she can show you a few images and tell us a bit more about our work on the field. And then Edgar, and then we can have some sort of discussion. So Fernanda, please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for having us today. I will share a few images about the work we are doing in regenerative agriculture. We are working mostly in an area of Costa Rica called Guanacaste. It's a very dry area. And this is one community garden. We started working in August last year. And so this is how it used to look. It's a super dry, very degenerated soils. And This is already, when we start, we put like 10 kilograms of compost per hectare, per square meter. And so we start bringing the organic matter back to the soil. This is, these community gardens work with the communities, and we have technical people that are working with them, and they're teaching them capacities, and they're training them. And this is the communities working. So you see all the people there. And this is already a few months ago, maybe 2 months ago. This is how it started looking now, all green. And we have also seen how the biodiversity is coming, the bees and different insects are coming back. And you see from very dry land, now it looks like a small little forest. This is very soon. We work with doing the beds, and then we have a mulch on top of it so that the water stays there, and that is better for plagues. You see, we also work with different vegetables. So in one bed, you have maybe 10 different species of vegetables. So you see here, and also different sizes and different times. So when you can take a lettuce in maybe 2 months, you have, for example, eggplants on tomatoes that they will grow in 4 or 5 months. So these are pictures. They have so much production. So this it's made especially for them to be able to produce their own food. But since there is so much production, they have been able to go to the market to sell their production. So nowadays, they are not only feeding themselves, but they are able to make money and to feed their community. And for a long, long time in Guanacaste, all the vegetables have come from the valley, which is maybe like 3 hours away. And people couldn't believe that they can grow lettuce in Guanacaste. And so all of a sudden now they have all these vegetables there. So as I say, we have 2 ecological community gardens. I just show you some pictures of Tempate. And there are about 50 families involved between these 2 community gardens. As I say, we introduced 10 kilograms of compost per square meter to establish the garden. And there is about 40 variety of vegetables in each of them. We also work with 175 family gardens that are 10 meters square. So these are people that have the gardens in their houses. So it's like small gardens, and we are helping them, and we give them the materials, we give them the seeds, we give them the wood to make the beds, for example. We also have 2 workshop sites in other areas of Guanacaste where we invite people that are already dedicated to agriculture, so conventional agriculture, and we are teaching them and training them in regenerative agriculture techniques. Finally, we are also working here in San Jose with the municipality of San Isidro, and we are hoping to work with more municipalities in conjunction to give workshops to all the community. So coming, we have 3 more community gardens in the area of Guanacaste. We have 2 projects with technical schools, which is like, technical schools for young people. And they have lands that are sometimes are not being used. So we are gonna work with them to produce in the lands. And we are also establishing bioproduction production centers. So at the moment, a lot of the things that, for example, the compost and the seedlings, we have to take from the city, from San Jose, which is about 3 hours, to Guanacaste. So the idea is to be able to establish these bio-input production centers, so that is in the area. I will also talk a little bit about holistic management. Holistic management is a training, comes from Savory Institute, from Alan Savory. And we have been trained with Savory, and we are establishing a hub in Costa Rica. The idea of Savory is that we have to mimic nature and how the herds used to walk and how they use the land. Not only how they graze it, but also how they impact it. And then you need time for the grass to recover. So it's very important to give the land the necessary time for it to recover. So it works with big animal impact, and then you need time. So here we are working. We are already working in 3 farms in Costa Rica. So this is they are gonna be our demo sites. So this is how a grazing plan looks like. This is working with another of the farms. I will show you a little video because it's very nice to see so many cows together. And so this is a little bit of paradigm shift, because a lot of the people that were with livestock think that it's not possible to have so many animals. They're going to destroy the grass, right? So we need to work with that. But actually, that's what we need. We need to really put a lot of impact and a lot of urine, and that will be actually the compost for the grass to grow back really strong. Oh, sorry. And then we are almost finishing a certificate in regenerative entrepreneurship. This certificate, it's actually, we have our last session in 2 weeks. It's a 16 months program. We had 45 great minds in regenerative development. We had a webinar each week. And the graduates are gonna, at this moment, we have 25 graduates, and they need to do a project. So out of it, it's coming to life about 25 amazing projects in regeneration. And yeah, so we are gonna open one in June. So you're also invited to join us. It's very open in a sense. So we only have like a project, we have an essay, and we meet every week for 90 minutes. And so maybe some things will change for the second version, but yeah, please, if you find it interesting, yeah, stay in touch for that. And that's about it. I will pass it to Edgar, who will share with us also.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Fernanda. I'm thrilled to be here with you. I'm very grateful. So what we are doing here in Costa Rica may be inspired by a question that will look like this. And I'm going to ask you this question, which is, what is that you are doing today to add value to the planet instead of subtracting value to the planet? So we are trying to find different answers to this question, and I think that by doing that, we are putting on a huge ecosystem of projects that will allow us to act as designers of solutions, as connectors of different initiatives, as curators of different experiences, and also, of course, as developers of strategies. So basically, we are trying to give an answer to find how will those answers look like when we are working on the ground. And also imagine that this question is given to you by a hummingbird, for instance. So the hummingbird will probably tell you that he is able to add value to the planet every day, every hour, every minute, every single second of his life. So how can we do something like that? Well, basically what we think is that we have to, as I mentioned before, put on an ecosystem of different projects that will impact different dimensions of the development of a bioregion, of a city, of a town, of a country. And those different dimensions will start by the impact that we can address to the biodiversity. So biodiversity in our thoughts, it's beginning to look like the real infrastructure. So that means that the other dimension that will be infrastructure has to be in a way responding to the need of thriving the biodiversity of our bioregions. But also there are other dimensions like coexistence, habitat, governance, and very important productivity. So those different dimensions, in order to be impacted, need to have a new consensus. And it means that we must work very hard to build a consensus that converts regenerative forms of production and political management into the usual forms. This means that what we design, what we are going to design requires not only configuration, but also rhythm and scale. And by doing these kind of designing practices, we may be able to change the course of our development in our countries in order to really curb or tackle inequalities and the planetary crisis. So basically, I will add to what I said before, that in a very practical way, we are working right now with 12 municipalities in a bioregion of Guanacaste, which is the place that most of those slides and images came from. So in this bioregion of Guanacaste, we are working in a very, let's say, bottom-up way of doing things, basically because we are, we believe very strongly that this kind of new development, this kind of regenerative approach should come or should begin in that community instead of in the superstructure of the governments. So basically, we are trying to create new ways of governance in order for us to relate with the phenomenon of power in a very different way. I think I will leave it like that. And of course, I've been seeing in the chat different questions about experiences that we had before, like those experiences that Eduard mentioned about how to measure the development of a city by measuring the health of the pollinators and earthworms. And things like that look very atypical are coming to be true in our practice of creating new ways, new paths for development.
This is just a very brief overview of a very complex initiative. We have over 15 projects running, and there are probably another 100 to come very soon, because this is a holistic approach. But I would like to actually open it up for discussion. Maybe Jim, if you want to jump in, you probably have a few questions that can guide a further discussion.
Thank you, Edgar and Fernando and Ed. Yes, I mean it's splendid, and Edgar, congratulations on everything you've been doing with the earthworms and so forth and so on. That's very endearing, and I think it's an example of just how simple and actually easy regeneration can be if you just start with the obvious and with nature in some ways at its most basic. I mean, what could be more basic than an earthworm? And here we're pouring, tons of fertilizers on our soil that are wiping everything else. So I would love to have you tell us a little bit more about earthworms.
Yeah, well, basically, I think the aha moment came when we decided to move away from human-centered approaches. So that's as simple as that. I mean, so let's say that cities. I was mayor of a city for 12 years, and I learned that cities were designed against nature in terms of, this is the legacy we have in Latin America. It was a very intentional way of designing these human spaces in order for the supernatural to thrive instead of trying to create a new landscape that will not interrupt nature. So basically, cities are interrupting the landscape, or are disrupting the landscape in a way that not only they look different, but also they are always neglecting the possibility of harmonizing with nature. So when you find that out, when we found that out, it was very easy to say, well, what will this city look like if we move away a little bit from the center of our preoccupations and make ourselves being accompanied by earthworms or pollinators. So the answer to that more complex question was moving in different ways, and those different ways became different projects. So basically, from the idea of creating a city also for pollinators, for example, we came out with more than 100 projects. And that means that those projects, even if they were meant to be for bees, for instance, allowed the city to interact with the neighbors in a very different way. Like, for instance, why don't you use your patio in order to create a park for pollinators? It's going to be your private property. We are not asking for that property to be public. But why don't you use your private property in order to create a public service, not for people, but for bees? That is a public service for bees that allowed us to connect with the whole idea of ecosystem services. So basically, if I have to say it in a very technical way, what we basically did was to also to add to the normal services another layer of services that were provided for other beings instead of only for human beings. Beautiful. So in the case of the earthworm, it was very interesting to build capacity in the municipality in order for the people that was working in the municipal gardens to learn that they were working for earthworms. And what is the logic behind that is that if the earthworm is happy, then we are sequestrating carbon, and we are filtering carbon into the earth. And that is the place where the carbon should be. So we create a whole public campaign around the idea of, well, let's be as happy as an earthworm. What needs the earthworm to be happy? Well, it needs a lot of chemical components, but especially carbon. So let's sequestrate carbon for the earthworm. And by designing this experience, we change the landscape of the city.
Beautiful. And just parenthetically, I'd love to hear about the bee situation in Costa Rica, because I have been a beekeeper for many decades. I love bees. I love the honey. I love to eat the comb honey. I love just being around bees. But we've been afflicted with all kinds of bee colony disorders, as they're calling it, mostly because of the environmental pollution. And I finally gave up, both because I was traveling, but also because I just couldn't keep the hives going. You just couldn't keep, even with.
It's incredible. Costa Rica is the largest consumer of chemicals. And this goes to corporate agriculture that produces pineapple, banana, mainly those two. If I were a European, I wouldn't buy a single pineapple from Costa Rica. It has basically killed ecosystems. And we've had millions of bees die off over the last months. And they're still promoting the use of these pesticides. The Ministry of Agriculture, the universities are still training chemical salesmen. They're not anymore agronomists. They don't understand anything about ecology. It's all getting chemicals out to the field. So this is the bad side. The good side is, for example, these pictures that Fernanda showed, it's only one small sample. So I'm really, really, really excited about the potential regeneration. It surpasses our expectations. Within 4 or 5 months of work, we had 6 native pollinator bees come up to this plot. And this was a 2-hour survey. The real survey is going to start next week, where we actually go through the whole property. But we only looked at maybe 1,000 square meters. So we had 70 new species of insects that were not found there 3 months before that. Wow. 70 new species in a 2-hour search in 1,000 square meters. We had wasps that were doing their duty, capturing pest insects. We had 6 types of ladybugs, which are extremely useful for regenerative agriculture because they eat also pests. Butterflies. We had 3 species of dragonflies, which are also pest controllers. So even if a few leaves have a few holes in them, I actually when I go to the farmer's market, I buy those vegetables because I know they don't have chemicals. If I find a little worm in there, I just wash it off, but I know it's healthy, the plant. Yes. If I see a beautiful tomato or a beautiful lettuce without a single hole, I won't even touch that because that means it's full of chemicals. So it's just changing our pattern. But once you get that food on your plate, the flavor and the nutritious content in it is just so abundant. We're talking about abundance. We're talking about these families that went from starvation to an overproduction. They sold 1 million colones, which is now about $2,000 this month in farmers market, after consuming 30 families, after 30 families getting satisfied with fresh fruit. Wow. And we were told you couldn't grow vegetables in that part of the country. So we're just killing everybody in the sense that we're showing that it can be done. And it can be done on a profit. And we don't have to pay 30% or 40% of our income to the chemical companies. So this is what we're doing. We're showing that it can be done differently. What Edgar did is actually showing other cities around the world that if you do concentrate on earthworms in public spaces and hummingbirds, Edgar actually threw down his garage, sold his car, and dedicated the area to a second hummingbird because they're territorial. So in the back part of his garden, he had hummingbirds fighting for space. So he threw down his garage and planted
Fantastic.
This is examples. So then the whole city starts thinking about, well, if the mayor does it, I can do it. So the key now, what we're doing, that's our alliance with you, Jim, and Ubiquity and GPM, Green Project Management, and many other organizations have joined, is we need to educate and show education with examples, not education with theory. So we actually can show these examples, show that it's working. We're going to monitor the amount of carbon. I'm going to prove all those people that are against cattle. I'm not saying cattle production is good the way it's being done, but we can actually use cattle in this ecosystem which captures more carbon, commercial ecosystem, which captures more carbon than any other. It captures more carbon than the forest. And the thing is, it puts it underground, away from fires. Whereas a forest has 80% of the carbon stored in the biomass that with one fire is released within seconds. So we need to just not say this, we need to actually monitor. So we're now waiting for some sensors that have been developed that measure carbon real time. And then we can show in 3-4 years how many tons of carbon we are capturing while producing better beef. So it's just this educational process. And there, Edgar has another big advantage. He was the Minister of Education at the beginning of this government. So he knows the politics of education and has a very clear perspective. And with the universities together, we're now designing with these high schools. There are 580 schools that have farms that are now not working because of COVID. There are no resources to keep these farms going. So we're going to bring these farms back. Can you imagine every kid learns how to produce his own food? And he can then go and do this at his house and set up a small family farm. And then have the local restaurants and hotels purchase from these community farms. So the value, the transactional value stays there and doesn't go to a big corporation in the US or wherever. So this is how our social development will come to play. So we just have to show the numbers, and that is what we're doing, and educate at the same time. So this is a good mix to actually shift the way we educate.
Yeah, that raises a question in my mind for the two of you and Fernanda, if she has a comment about the politics of regeneration in Costa Rica. You know, Costa Rica is known worldwide for the abolition of its army. And I think people project onto Costa Rica almost a Shangri-La quality of environmental awareness and political tolerance and so forth. But I would love to have you share with the group, what's the experience that you have as you work toward regeneration with these little plots of lands and these schools? Is it receiving large-scale national government support? Is there, like in the United States, there's resistance almost everywhere you go because of the lock on the US political economy by the agribusiness fossil fuel industry that resists any kind of regenerative activity or non-fossil fuel. And yet, inevitably, we continue to make progress, but we're always pushing the rock up the hill. In Costa Rica, is the situation different?
I'll give it over to Edgar because he is a politician. I'm not, but a very good politician, by the way. But this has to be done in spite of government, in spite of the corporate sector. So if we can get government support, which we don't have right now, this would be wonderful. It could help us scale. I mean, our budget is a 0.000001% of what a government institution can. But right now, we're getting friction from the Ministry of Agriculture. They're still putting plastic on top of the beds. and using pesticides in many parts of the country, promoted by the Ministry of Agriculture. They were the ones saying, our stuff is not commercial. Our stuff won't give money to these farmers. So we're just proving them wrong. So now we're collaborating, at least with the local people from the Ministry of Agriculture. So it's step by step. We're working with the mayors, step by step. We couldn't work with all of them, but there's some that are really wanting to. So it's just proving that we can, but I'll pass it on to Edgar. Go ahead, Edgar. You're on mute. Edgar, you're on mute.
Yeah, sorry. So it doesn't come with a surprise to learn that there is an ongoing conflict, and that is going to be like that everywhere, I believe, because basically, if let's picture this in the regeneration paradigm. Let's picture it like with four components. So one of those very important components will come with design and technology. The other one will come with knowledge and science. We have also resources, different sources of different kind of resources, like human resources, money. Let's put money there. And then you have the political consensus, or we may call it the cultural consensus. So basically, we are coming from another consensus. We have money on the planet. We have knowledge and science. We have this design capacity and technology. And we also have a consensus. Only that consensus right now operates in favor of a different way of believing in development. So basically, to go from that Eduard explained it very well when he talked about the pineapple, the Costa Rican pineapple. To go from that to another kind of pineapple that will be more healthy requires to change the way we envision the whole development process. So we have a very, we have a piece of our territory living in very harsh ways because it's producing pineapple, but it's not producing pineapple for us, it's producing pineapples for another city, probably in Europe. That means that that place is not only a pineapple plantation, that place is a urbanization resource because it provides pineapple for another place, another city elsewhere. So what we believe is that those places where the real life happens have to be impacted by the regeneration paradigm. And what we are basically saying, as you mentioned, Jim, it may be simpler than we believed before. It could be as simple as change the experience of the water drops, change the experience of the earthworm, change the experience of the hummingbird, change the experience of the pollinators, change the experience of women, change the experience of vulnerable people. And if we change those experiences and we commit to it, we may have the possibility of creating a new consensus in the political sphere. And that is what we are trying to do, pushing this new consensus from the bottom to the top.
Beautifully put, beautifully put. Fernanda, do you have any comment you want to add?
No, I was just gonna say that the political sector maybe and the enterprise, it's more difficult to move, but we have felt a lot of the civil society is very, very interested in what we're doing, and the communities are really happy to work with us. So, and I think all around the world, we are seeing that more and more the young and the communities, the society, the civil society is willing to change. Like we notice that things are not going well. And also in many business, people are willing to go beyond their duties or their responsibilities to do some social work or to do some environmental work. And as Costa Rica Regenerativa, we have many people sending us messages to see how they can help us. And we actually need to get a structure and see how we can manage all these hands that want to help us. Because at the moment we are a small team, so we have so many things to do that to also align these hands, it is something that needs work, right? But we are super happy to have them, and it really makes me hopeful of the future.
Well, you're right. Organizing all the hands
Yeah.
is the task, as Ed and Edgar will testify. It's getting people organized that is the real challenge. I'd like to, as we bring this to a close, to take up the comment that Ed made a few minutes ago on the importance of education. I just put in the chat box a link to our new Masters in Regenerative Action that we're launching in partnership with UCI and about another, I'd say 15, 20 other organizations, including Kate Rayworth's Donut Experimental Action Lab, and others. I put her course. We're going to be launching the program in June. So you can take a look at her course on the fundamentals of donut economics. Ed is going to be bringing one of our other core courses. Kate's course on donut economics will be a core course. Ed's course, which is going to be a global survey on regeneration, will be another core course. So Ed, I'd love to have your comment on our new Masters on Regenerative Action, and maybe something that you're going to be covering in your course. And then Edgar, since you were Minister of Education, I would love to have your comment on the importance of changing consciousness. You know, it's a change of consciousness when you go from a tractor to an earthworm. It's a change of consciousness when you go from fertilizers to pollinators. It's a change of perception. And that's why education is so fundamental. And both Ed and I founded our respective universities because we understood this, and we knew that education needs to be fundamentally transformational, what the ancient Greeks called paideia. If it's not true education unless the learning is transforming the heart and mind of the student. And that's what both our universities are seeking to do. So Ed, would love your comment on education, and then Edgar, and then Fernanda, would love to hear from you as well.
Yeah, you know, the biggest challenge, Jim, is moving education, academics, research from reductionism to holism.
Yes.
We haven't been capable as humans, even with the high technology we have, to solve any of our problems, our true problems, our real problems. So Costa Rica designed a decarbonization strategy a couple of years ago. And a lot of it is based on turning gasoline cars to electric cars. That is not a real fix. That is a cosmetic fix. But the reductionist thinking is what allows engineers and economists to think of that as a solution, because they are not capable of seeing the real roots of the problem because they're complex. And our universities are divided in departments, and peer-reviewed journals require very narrow research to be published. So the whole academic system is built around reductionism. And reductionism alone won't. I'm not saying we don't need, I mean, we wouldn't get to a vaccine like the ones we have today at the speed we have today if we didn't have that sort of science. But we have dropped out completely the link between the spiritual, the consciousness, and the technical. And this, as I mentioned, was done due to the evolution of philosophers and physicists like Newton that separated us from nature. So in order for us to really be able to educate people, in my university, the biggest challenge I had when I started it in 1994 was finding teachers that were willing to unlearn. Yeah, they weren't the owners of knowledge. And along the way, I even had a lot of resistance when I told them, I don't want you teaching. I don't want anybody teaching. I want people to facilitate a learning process, and it's completely different. So the focus is on the student, not on the teacher.
Yep.
Exams were made to make life of a teacher easy, especially the ones you tick in a box, because a teacher can correct that in a few minutes. Whereas real transformational learning requires a huge capacity. We even called soft skills soft. They are the critical skills that students need to learn today.
Yeah.
You can learn how to repair a microwave, at least I do, on YouTube. I've repaired my microwave. Usually I just throw them away. I just Googled and I found everything online on how to repair my microwave. But I don't find anything online how I can transform myself into actually being able to sit and enjoy nature and try to learn from nature how it works and how to solve complex problems as nature does. So our reductionist world takes a complex system apart, like an ecosystem, into components. And we literally dissect these components to death, put them in formaldehyde, and we think we understand the system by understanding the micromolecular structure of the components. If you go to indigenous culture, at least in Latin America, where I have more experience, and maybe some in Africa and Asia where I've been exposed to it, they look at a system by the interactions, not by the components. Our universities cannot look at a system by interaction because there are cement walls between them, between those departments. So people from ecology, they don't work together with people from anthropology or from politics or from, spirituality. And those are the interactions. So we really need to reinvent. And this is where I see our MRA being so fabulous. And that's what I'm going to cover in my introductory course on regenerative development, is how we move to really identifying the complexity of the issues and prioritizing solutions. So everybody's focused on climate change, but actually biodiversity loss is going to get us out of the planet as humans way before climate change does. We're at extremely critical levels of biodiversity loss, where 3/4 of the planet are not producing the ecosystem services to keep humanity alive. And yet we focus on electric cars. So we don't have our priorities right. So we first have to identify which are our priorities and which are the low-hanging fruit. So instead of reducing emissions through a lot of political and economic incentives and questioning fights, 26, 27 years of fights within the convention, and we still haven't solved it. Why not change all agriculture, getting rid of the chemical lobbyists? And if we just transform the way we produce our food, we can be back at 280 parts per million within 30 years. And science now has evidenced that. So with cattle production alone, regenerating cattle in half of the lands where cattle is being produced, we can capture 10 gigatons more carbon than what is emitted globally every year, just with cattle alone. So you add cattle, regenerative agriculture, and regeneration of natural spaces, natural ecosystems, wetlands, not only forests, seabeds, grass beds. We can within 30 years, that's within my life still, have a better planet. So this is a message we have to get out with education. And for that, kids need to understand who they are, what is their potential. And we cannot expect kids to be matched by groups of age, learning all the same stuff around the world. That takes creativity away from them in kindergarten. So we need to bring back an education that highlights the differences. You know, my kid is fabulous with music, but he's not stellar in language, in Spanish language. So I don't care if he gets a C or a D in Spanish, as long as he's happy with his music. And his music then interlinks with math. No, everybody has to have the same education, and that gets rid of creativity, of the individual. And that is what we need to bring back. And that's where soft skills and the program you've developed on soft skills, I just would love to have you change the name from soft to critical skills or to the important skills. That is what we need to focus on. But that requires a different type of teacher. It's easy to teach math. How easy is it to actually bring across the need for conscious transformation of kids that since kindergarten were not allowed to be different? We're all different. Edgar.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, education is a huge field of knowledge and debate, and deliberation can take years and years. But in order to add to the discussion right now, I will say that we may think about the origin and the real motivation of every single school there is in the planet. And that is the motivation of a community that basically told itself how that community will become once the school was there. And that narrative has to be recovered in a way. So what I'm saying is that the huge project of education starts with this idea of bringing students, bringing little kids to have knowledge, but also to have that change of consciousness that you mentioned, Jim. So we have to struggle in order to recover that basic motivation. Every single school in Costa Rica was created by a community. They were not created by the government. So this is probably truth around the world. I wasn't able to see a map created in 1970, for instance, that will predict how the school system will look like on a map in 1980, because there was not such a thing. Schools were creating itself by the strength and the capacity of different communities. So we have to raise that question. Why is that a community wants a school? Why they struggle to have a school in Africa or in the global south, let's say? Why do they do that? Well, basically they do that for that reason, Jim, for the reasons that you mentioned. And then we have a system that is captured in a way by political parties, by governments. And out of that came a system that is creating a huge divide, especially in the global south, between people that has a certificate and people that doesn't have the certificate. And that divide happens to have a very harm effect on the people that do not have that certificate because they cannot be being connected to the market, to the labor market in a swift way. So we have to think about that huge amount of people. I will say something that I feel embarrassed to recognize, having been Minister of Education, but especially being Costa Rican. We are a country of, let's say, 5 million people. Well, probably 40% of that people do not have the benefit of having a certificate. That means that we are actually running two economies at the same time, the economy of the poor and the economy of the rich. And by doing that, the same educational system that was provided by the community to create equity is being used to produce inequity. And that is a very perverse way of dealing with the educational problem. So I think that in a more technical way, if we want the result to be the changing of consciousness, the changing of perceptions, the changing of the way we deploy our capacities in order to think about other beings different than human beings. Well, in a very technical way, we have to evaluate within the system those capacities instead of evaluating other things, because evaluation in education, it's a determined factor of everything else. So I believe, if I'm talking in a very technical way, I believe that all the people that is working very hard on education is working on changing the curricula, for instance, but very few are changing the evaluation system. And changing the evaluation system in order to, now I'm putting the dots together. Changing the evaluation system is the way to allow those people without certification to be inside again the educational process, because we could evaluate the knowledge that they are gaining even if they don't go to school anymore. Because that's another kind of, let's say, myth that we have to change, that people only learn in schools, people only learn in universities. Well, not. People learn everywhere, especially if we want citizens to be thriving, we need people to learn from others. That can be a definition of a citizen, that one that learned from others. What did he learn? What did she learn? Well, she basically learned to deal with the moral dilemmas of the coexistence with others. And that brings, with the word others, we can bring different beings, not only human beings. So dealing with others also means dealing with nature, beginning to acknowledge that we are nature. So we have to change a lot of things in education, and I guess we will have the rest of our lives working on that task.
This is the rest of our lives, folks. You know, and on your point, Edgar, about what we learn in school, the data, at least that I have heard, is that 70% of what we learn is actually learned outside the classroom.
Yeah.
That's one reason I think it's probably true for UCI, is certainly for Ubiquity. We allow students to bring into the university for credit anything they've learned, as long as they can demonstrate the competencies that they've derived from their learning.
Well, that's a great idea.
That's a whole new way of thinking about it. It's not about grades, it's about competencies. Yes. You know, how do we learn to honor differences? I mean, that's an important.
Can you imagine how sad it is for this, for us, for everyone, that people walk around there, not not having the right way to assess what they are in
Yeah.
terms of knowledge. That's very sad.
Yeah.
Everybody should have, like, this should be a human being, a human right. Like, you have the right to assess what you learn, no matter where. You have the right to assess or being assessed what your knowledge is, because that knowledge is the only way for people to get empowered.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and just this point that you're making, we've got to bring it to a close because we're running out of time. But what Ubiquity's been working on is what we call a UB pass.
Yeah.
Where someone can come in, and we don't quite have it ready for the public yet. It's still in a beta stage. But to your point, people should be able to come into a process and assess what they've learned and the competencies they've developed in their life by whatever means they've learned and developed those competencies. And we're trying to crack the code on this. And one of these days, I'm going to have our Chief Innovation Officer, Peter Mary, to come on to describe the UB Pass, because what you just said, in our view, and I think that's true for you, Ed, for UCI generally, that's the future. Developing the competencies that young people need to have from whatever source they're gaining it, and then developing a process by which you can evaluate those competencies. And what we're also doing is then you link them to global standards, and that becomes the new accreditation. That becomes the new way of being. And that's another thing. We'll have another panel on it, but Ed and I and a whole group of people, educators, are putting together the Global Accreditation Council, which is really trying to develop new ways of assessing how people learn, and at the center of which is the political statement, if you will, that learning needs to lead to regeneration of community and the planet. It's no longer tenable for universities just to impart knowledge, how do you fix your microwave? That's not what true learning is, because you can get that on YouTube. Ed fixed his own microwave and he didn't need to go to Harvard, you know? And so there's a whole explosion and revolution in education that Ubiquity and UCI and others are right in the middle of. And it's a very juicy endeavor. So thank you for those comments, Edgar. Would love to get you involved in our Global Accreditation Council. It would be wonderful to have your sage advice and wise counsel.
Thank you.
Now, Fernanda, I don't want to forget about you. I'd love to hear your views on education before we wrap up. And then Ed, I want you to have just a final word, and then we'll close. But Fernanda?
Well, I think I agree with Eduard and Edgar, and I don't have much to say except that I have noticed myself a different kind of education. And I went to do a master's degree, which was in sustainability and leadership, and it was all about co-creation and collaborative work. And I see so many things happening around the world, and so many people interested in how to work on your emotions and how to work with other people. And so I think it's happening. All of this is already happening. And I'm really, really glad to be involved with amazing people as Eduard and Edgar. And yeah. So.
Thank you. It's been wonderful having you.
Thank you.
And you're right, to be able to work with Edward and Edgar is a real privilege and honor. I feel it every time Ed and I interact. So thank you, Fernanda. Thank you, Edgar. And Ed, give us a final word.
My final word would be thank you, Jim, for convening these spaces. These are fundamental. We need we need to get a lot of people on board. We need to mainstream this. And there is a huge resistance, just like the petrochemical industry is going to keep on bribing politicians and whatever to keep on with their market. The educational industry lost track and went into a money-making machine, or ego academic development. We lost track of what education is for. So if we don't rethink what we want to learn, what we need to learn, where to learn it, how to learn it, how to evaluate it. I mean, these are fundamental questions that have to be asked every day. Just as Edgar said, the hummingbird does a good thing for nature every single second of its life. We need to evaluate our impact on life itself every minute. So I see people pointing fingers out. A lot of people point fingers out to China and say, okay, the US was the culprit for 30 years, but now it's China the culprit. So unless China doesn't reduce emissions, we're not going to do anything. But then I asked them a very simple question. Where's your cell phone made? Where's your computer made? Oh, so that Chinese footprint is your footprint. So for China to reduce the footprint, you have to stop buying all the junk you buy from China to fill your life with junk. So people have to start asking, the long questions.
Exactly.
Going to the root causes, not the symptoms. But the whole educational system is developed around treating symptoms. So what is COVID? It's a virus, coronavirus, that hopped from nature to humans because humans have killed almost all nature. And now we interact with species that we didn't have interaction before. And there are 800,000 more viruses to come on board. So what are we going to do? Keep on inventing vaccines at billions and trillions? If all that money would have been put into saving nature 5 years ago, we wouldn't have COVID. How much money was poured into the vaccination development? Trillions of dollars, blank checks. Oh, but without nature, we're not alive. Nature does not need us. Nature does not need us taking care of it. That's a big mistake we made. We need nature functioning, well functioning, for us to be alive. And this is the main message we need to get out there with these new educational approaches. So we have to learn from our whole evolution. We produce more data every year than in prehistory. Some of it goes to information, some of it goes to knowledge. Zero is going to wisdom. Our ancestors cherished wisdom. They spent time thinking, analyzing, absorbing, and creating wisdom and making decisions based on that wisdom. This is the best scientifically documented planetary extinction. We have all the science to know why we're going to go down the drain. But we are incapable of understanding that and using that to make decisions. We make decisions based on our own, what kind of car do I want? And am I going to be a better person if I drive around in Mercedes-Benz? Because people are going to look at me and say, wow, that guy's a successful person. And there's no relationship between the value of your car and your success in terms of happiness. So I see poor communities that are so happy. I have a bunch of workers in my house because it caught fire last week. These guys are singing and telling jokes and laughing all the time. And here I am stressed, stuck to my computer all day. Who's happier? These guys are really happy. I mean, they're putting music when they have lunch, they share everything, they sing songs. Are they living better than I am as construction workers? Probably yes. They don't need so much baggage. We just got used to traveling with baggage and thinking baggage is happiness. So let's keep on working. And you people out there, keep following us. We're going to change the world together.
Thank you, Ed. Jim. Thank you so much. And Edgar and Fernanda, this has been a wonderful programs. And if you remember nothing else, everyone, remember the earthworms and the hummingbirds. And remember, the next time you go to the farmer's market, look for the cosmetically challenged fruits and vegetables, as they're called, because those are the healthy ones. That was a great point, Ed. Thank you. And then tomorrow we're gonna turn to another aspect of regeneration, and that is moving from communing to actual communication with other species. And we're going to talk to a woman who's one of the leading animal communicators in the UK around how do we really not only honor the rest of the eco field, but learn to communicate through interspecies communication. So it's a wonderful session that we're going to have tomorrow. And then you're all welcome to the after chat session. The link is in the chat. And then if you want to respond in any way to what's been talked about today with blogs or videos or just comments, please go to our UVverse. It's uvverse.org, which is our social platform, which is an alternative to Facebook. We don't commodify any of your information or use data. We honor privacy. So that's all part of the Ubiquity brand and ethos on our UVverse. But Ed, splendid platform. I'd love to hear everything about Regenerate Costa Rica. It's an inspiration to the world. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you here again tomorrow, same time, same station, for communication with animals. Bye for now.
By the way, Jim, just short notice. In the island of Dominica, there's a project translating whale language to human language so we understand marine issues.
Fantastic. Send me the link. I'd love to talk with them. I'd love to get them on. Bye for now.
Good. Thank you. Bye-bye.